Before we start, I have one favor to ask you. My daughter turns 16 tomorrow, so I want to say happy birthday, Wilma, on my count to 3 so I can film it and send to her. I think that would be cool. If you do that, I will do some great demos in a few minutes. We have a couple of minutes, we can do a couple of retries, but please use every air volume you have in you. Say, happy birthday, Wilma. You see if I can get it like this. On my count to 3. 1, 2, 3. Happy birthday, Wilma. That is awesome. Thank you so much. Love it. She's going to hate me for it, though. 16, yeah. 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 So how many of you did see my previous sessions on getting started on Teams development? So yeah, I did a session on Monday. It was packed with people. This is a little bit more spot-on topic, a very specific topic. So yeah, but if you want to see the getting started and building app from 0 to 20, do repeat tomorrow afternoon in the Hyatt Theater. Otherwise, yeah, you can find it online as well. These are recorded. So I think she's almost on time. As I said, it's going to be a deep dive into messaging extensions, which originally were called compose extensions. One of my favorite topics of Microsoft Teams development, because it's very simple interface and it's a very smart interface for the end users to actually make the conversations much more interesting. Enrich that conversational context with rich adaptive cards that the users can take action on. You can, of course, build tabs, you can build bots, connectors, and a lot of other things. These messaging extensions are actually based on the bot framework. So it's the bot framework protocol that we're actually using, and those are the kind of things we're going to go and have a look at. Unfortunately, not everything is perfect. I will try to show you some of the areas where I think the product should have, there is room for improvement, and also where you need to watch out when you design your systems. I think, haven't heard if it's the official announcement, but the slides I saw this morning is that they didn't use messaging extensions anymore, so they used commands and actions instead. And that resonates more with end users as well. Messaging extension, yeah, by looking at it, you can't really see what it is, but commands and action makes more sense. So the idea today here is to take a look at message extensions, what they are, where they can appear, the commands and actions, how we can extend that kind of conversational canvas with much more interesting line of business information. The way we, as I said in the slide, piggyback on the bot framework. So essentially, to build a message extension, you need to create a bot first, but you don't have to create a bot that you chat with. But you need to register that one in Azure, etc. So how do we build them, and how do they really work? Because I think this is the interesting thing. And you can do quite a lot of things if you understand what's actually being sent back and forth between the client and your application. So how many in here has built a Teams application? Or even been close or trying to build something? One thing that's important to understand first and compare to other kind of applications, think about the SharePoint application, SharePoint Framework web part. That is something that contains all the logic and all the source code and everything. You upload it to the app catalog and the JavaScript files, etc. is being hosted. With Microsoft Teams, it is not like that. The Teams application is very slim. It's a JSON file. It's a manifest that defines or points at other applications. So in the case of a tab, it points to a website somewhere. In the case of a bot, it has essentially registered a bot ID, so which points to Azure, which points to a messaging endpoint. And the same thing with message extensions. The application, I will not build it from scratch. We will go through the code in the application I had, but I scaffolded it with the Yeoman Teams generator, which helps you do this. And specifically for messaging extensions, there's quite a few options. So you can essentially click through all the, I think it's 8 or 9 different combinations you can create these commands and actions. You can do them all through the generator and have it scaffold out all the code you need to get started. The source code for the demos will be at that GitHub repo after a couple of hours after the session today. So with that, let's jump over to my demo. So what I have in here, and I'm going to make it fairly simple messaging extension. I'm going to use Planner. and add planner tasks. Instead of linking to the planner tasks, etc., I'm going to add rich information and way to look up planner tasks, but also way to create planner tasks. We're going to take a look at how that works. And I have running on my machine locally now, using the thing that was generated by the Joma generator. We're not going to look at this now. There's some logging and stuff in here, so we can see the messages going back and forth. But most importantly, this is hosted using a service called, or I'm using a service called ngrok. And ngrok allows you to have sort of public URL of your locally hosted server, which means that which is required for bots, for instance, because it needs connection to Azure and you need to have a public URL. But also this ngrok is super interesting because you can actually see the messages going back and forth between the Teams client and your bot. And that's what I'm using here. And the whole generator essentially is built by reverse engineering that, because the documentation in this area up until very recently has been very poor. So the first thing I'm doing is sideloading the application. And I have that zip file with the manifest, which then points to a bot. I will show you, while that is uploading, I'll show you the manifest here. The messaging extension are called in the manifest compose extensions. They require a bot ID, and that is replaced when I'm building this with the real bot ID, which is registered in Azure, which I can show you here. So, okay. Yeah, let that load in the background. But essentially, I registered the bot in Azure, so I got the ID, and that's what I'm using here. Then I specify a set of commands. And the first command I have in here is something called, it's actually a search command or a query command. And the query command is used to look up something. And in this case, I'm looking up planner tasks, and the user can select the planner task and then insert into the conversation. And you all used these kind of things. You all used the Giphy selector, right? That is a messaging extension with the query command. You look up something and insert that object. The second extension I have is an action-based, so it's type action. And that is used to create a task out of a conversation, a thread. So that's action one. But there's multiple different ways of actually combining this. As you can see in here, I have something called fetch task. By the way, how many did you see Bill Bliss' session this morning when he showed you? But he had one slide in there, and actually would have wanted to have the same slide myself. So think about this create task. You haven't seen it yet, but assume that you see when you're creating a task, you want some user input, right? You can get some context from the thread that we're doing, but you might want to input such a deadline for that task. There's three ways of getting input from the end users. The first one is a no-code solution. We can define in here a form. So it's a way by using this JSON format to define a form in here. The second way is to use an adaptive card. So using adaptive cards and create the form, and you send the card to the Teams client, and the end user fills it in. Or do the way called fetch task, where you actually create your own web page, essentially. So that's called a task module in Microsoft Teams, or a pop-up dialog. But you own the interface fully, so to say. And that's what we're doing in here. But let's take a look at what we're doing in here, because there's some interesting things that's important to think of when you're designing these kind of solutions. Let's jump into Microsoft Teams. So I've added application in here. Let's go back to the general channel and take a look at the first one. What's now happened is that under this ellipsis in here, we now have my messaging extension. I can, if I want to, pin it as well, so I can pin it down here. You will see this message extension down there. But the idea here, when I click on that one, I'm supposed to see planner tasks in here. But of course, planner tasks are, to access them, we need to sign into the Microsoft Graph, and we need the end user credentials for that. And this is a server-side kind of thing as well, which means that we need to do an OAuth loop to actually get the tokens so we can pass to the Microsoft Graph. We don't have time to go through that whole auth flow, but the sample is you can use this sample as a reference later if you want to take a look at how that ping pong goes back and forward. But that's another 60-minute deep dive on how to do that. So feel free to do it another time. So I click on sign in here, and it's fairly seamless. You come a pop-up, and now I actually have an alert there just for debugging purposes. But essentially what's happening is that that will go away. So it's almost a seamless single sign-on. But now the server side have my access token, so I can get the tasks. In this case, it's just the planner task that exists in my planner plan. I can click on this one, and what now will happen is that I'm inserting an adaptive card into my conversation here. So we can type something as well. Type, please check this task. And I have some information. I have some buttons on here. The first one will be very simple. I can go to the plan and to the task, and you see I have a deep link directly into the task here in Planner. So it's a good way to actually go back and forward between these kind of things. So go back to the conversation. The second thing I have is mark as complete. And this is I would say do not do this, and I'll show you why. I click on mark as complete here, something happens. If we click here, you will see that it's actually marked as complete. See, it's marked as complete, but the card here does not update, right? It still looks like this is an active task. And this is one of the things you shouldn't do with message extensions right now, because there's no way for me to, or the message extension to update this card. Because it was not the messaging extension that inserted this card, it was myself. It's me who added this into there. The only way to work around this is to create a bot that actually adds a card to conversation, have that bot update its own information. So unfortunately, that's something we have to live with. So what I want to show now is what happens behind the scenes. There's a couple of things. I told you I'm using ngrok, and here's everything that happens back and forth now during the clicking that I've been doing. And we're actually going to skip the first few one. You can see here something about auth. I said we're going to skip that. Then we get to these two things. These /post API, actually, there's one before that. Here's this one we need to look at. What's happening is that I said we're piggybacking on the bot framework. And that's done through something called an invoke method in the bot framework. And it's invoke method of the type compose extension query in this case. And that is the query. And this is the data that we get to the bot framework and into our service that we can work with. We can see who it's from. We can see the conversation and information about that. We can get the recipient. We can get some entities, etc. We get the channel data. And as you can see, there's a lot of information in here. But we also get the actual command ID, which is the name of the ID. We get some parameters. In this case, it's the initial run. That's when I click the first time. If I want to show, for instance, the last modified one or the last most recently used task or whatever. What I do then is send back is another JSON structure like this. In this case, we needed authentication, right? We need to authenticate the first time. So that's two ways of doing this. We can send an auth for authentication. We can also send the config for configuration. There's no difference between them, except that the Teams client will render a different title on the dialogues that pop up. So otherwise than that, there's no difference. And what I send here is send an action of type open URL, which means open my local URL here that will do that auth loop for me. So this is essentially how messaging extension works. You get a command in, you send this JSON structure back in some shape or form. If we take a look at the second one here, it's the same, the compose extension query. We scroll down again here. It's still the initial run here because that's after we've done that auth piece. But now let's take a look at the result here. Now I'm actually sending back the type result, a list of attachments. And these attachments are adaptive cards. First of all, it's 2 adaptive cards per item. You can see that I'm not going to go through all of that, but it's 2 adaptive cards per item. One which is a preview adaptive card. That's what we saw in that list, right? And also the real full adaptive card, and that's what I'm inserting into the conversation. So that you have an option there to modify the preview cards a little bit. So you can see there, it's just a big chunk of JSON. There's also, we can actually take a look at that. If we scroll down, action, yes. So each card has action. The first one is that action.submit, which is a mark as complete that I clicked on, that marks as complete. And I'm passing some information in here. which is the task ID and E tag, which is required by the graph and planner. So we don't have to care about that. But the key thing here, another really bad thing about using these kind of tasks, is if you have multiple messaging extensions, you will send this command to all of them. So you need to keep track of which card actually sent it to the information here. And also, you need to be careful about what information you have in here, of course. To give you an example of that, if we scroll back to the last one, which was that mark as complete, in that case, it's a little bit different. It's still an invoke, but we have an on-card button click, and that's the event that's being sent to every messaging extension you have in your application. It's not to someone else's messaging extension, only the message extensions you have in your application. And in my case, I have 2 of them. So we scroll down here. And in my case, I just return a 0. I'm not doing anything. But the key thing is, in this value here, there's nothing that says it's from this specific card. So I need to do something by myself here to mark that this is the actual action. To show you the second extension, as I said, it's going fast, I know. It's a deep dive in 20 minutes. Let's just write something here. Hello world. Type. So we have a conversation going on here. The action-based one appear in here under more actions. So there I have create task. I would say this is probably the most useful scenario to do something. Could be mark for compliance or archive or whatever. And I click create task here. So now another thing will happen. I used the config. Previous one I used the auth piece. I needed to sign in, but I use the configuration here. And the reason I need to do this is it's a bit small here. But I wanted to have a configuration option here. When I create a task, should we include a link to the conversation and those kind of things? So you can have your configuration options in there. So let's save. And once that is done, it will actually open up my task module and load my task. And I'm creating a name, a new task, which will be created. And what will happen now, it will create the task in Planner. It will insert a new card into the conversation for the newly created task. If we click on that one, and we click on Go to Plan and Task, we can actually see this is a task that's been created, and it should actually have a link back to the conversation as well. So I think this is a great way of making that conversation much more interesting to create these kind of things. It might be if you have a customer or support kind of team. Could be you have a conversation around the customer. It could be create a new service incident. It could be look up service incidents, and that's what's being used in quite a few cases. Or look up contacts from your customer or CRM system. So those are the typical scenarios for this. So just to go back to the ngrok stuff again, and one last time before we end here. So we had, first of all, should be this one. Compose extension fetch task. That's another one. That's the one we had for, since it was marked as a fetch task, and I mentioned that task module. And if take a look at the response back here, I sent the config back and the URL for the configuration where it's hosted. Scroll up. It's a lot of scrolling, I know. Sorry about that. So then we have the second task fetch being sent, where we actually get some information. And the interesting here is we get information about the message here. So we can see where do we have it? Yeah, so here's the content. So we can actually use that content that we see in that message as well when we're creating our task. And I actually added that content as a description in the task. So you get access to that. You know who created the conversation, those kind of things as well. And even if it has reactions like or heart or those kind of things, you can, if you want to use that in your. And then finally, in this case, I had a form. As I mentioned, it's a task module. It's an HTML form. And so I just passed the type continue and then a link to my form. I would most often when I've done this, I use adaptive cards because I think that's an easy way of configuring them. But in some cases, you want to do really advanced stuff. It might be lookups to other systems when you're creating that task. So to take a look at the code a little bit here, there's a lot of things I mentioned that since I wanted to do this with Planner, so the auth piece has to be there. Never mind that right now. But what I want to show you is that we have two of these message extensions. They are all registered in that bot. I'm using actually a middleware, a bot framework middleware, to handle that. Otherwise, there's no tooling from Microsoft directly right now that handles those, unless you're just using bot framework and do everything raw by yourself. That's why I created this middleware. It's published on npm js.org. If you want to download it and use it, it's used by the generator as well. But it makes it very simple for you to focus on creating your applications. So in this case, we have the first one, which has two methods. Also, we should skip the verified sign in. The onQuery, which is the method scroll up a bit. The method that's being called when we ask for that list of tasks in this case. And we have the other method, which is on-card button clicked. And it's in here I need to handle. So essentially, for both my messaging extension in this case, will get this card button click mark complete, if you remember. So I need to do some kind of filtering in here. In this case, I'm just sending back to the graph and patch it with %complete 100. And then I'm not sending anything back, so you see an empty resolve in the end there. So there are some rough edges with message extensions, specifically around this case when you want to make something actionable. And that is, for me, the missing piece. The product group is really aware of that. They're thinking about the good way to solve that. The problem is that it was you who inserted that card, right? So it's really hard to update. But they're looking at different ways of resolving that going forward. Otherwise, I think this is probably where you should start. If you want to do the tabs, of course, it's the easiest way to get started. It's just an iframe. But this is where if you want to focus on productivity for your end users and adoption, integrate these kind of things with your line of business systems. That will give value to your end users. That's it. 20 minutes deep dive. We couldn't spend an hour on this, more or two. But I hope it excited you a bit. And the reason I did this deep dive was to show you some of the things that I stumbled upon when I started with this. Understanding that message flow going back and forward. And it's essentially a bot that we're piggybacking on. Thank you all.